So welcome everybody to the first of our Partners in Care National Safeguarding Adults Week sessions. And this session is called What's My Role in Safeguarding Adults? So we're going to be thinking specifically about that notion that safeguarding is everybody's business. So this is me. My name's Karen Littleford. I'm Safeguarding Adults Lead for Partners in Care. My email address is on the screen now, just in case anybody does want to access any further information after the session. I work closely with partners in the independent and statutory sectors in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin, really to raise awareness of adult safeguarding and related matters. And I represent Partners in Care at the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership Adult Safeguarding and Protection Oversight Group. And our organisation also is represented at the Telford and Wrekin Safeguarding Partnership as well. So that's part of our role. Learning objectives for the session today. We're going to be thinking about what adult safeguarding is. We're going to be explaining why safeguarding is everybody's business, thinking about how we can outline how we involve adults in safeguarding. And we have a real agenda around that called Making Safeguarding Personal. We're going to clarify what professional curiosity is. And by the end, hopefully, we'll be able to summarise our role in safeguarding adults. So that's our plan for this short webinar today. We're going to start off by thinking about what is adult safeguarding. And I guess when we think about safeguarding, we could think about that really in a wide context, but we're going to kind of narrow that down really for our purposes for today. So can you jump into the chat and give us an A, B or C for this question? In your view, adult safeguarding is about, is it A, self-defence, B, protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect, or C, telling an adult how to be safe? What do you think, team? So I can see lots of answers coming into the chat. And for those of you who are watching this as a recording, I can confirm that so far, the majority of people are saying B, protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. And I have to tell you that I have had people tell me before that they think that adult safeguarding is about self-defence. And so sometimes the terminology that we use can be quite a challenge, can't it, around safeguarding? So let's see then, are you right on a Monday morning? Of course you are. So according to the Care Act and its guidance, adult safeguarding really is focusing on protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. So I thought it'd be helpful now to have a short film giving us a bit more information really on exactly that point.
We all have the right to be safe and to live a life free from harm. At certain times in our lives, we might need help and support to do this. Safeguarding is how we are protected from harm, but safeguarding is about more than this. It is about promoting our health and well-being, our rights, and it is about being empowered to make decisions for ourselves. Harm can come in many forms, and it affects people differently, but harm always impacts on the rights we are all entitled to enjoy. Some of the rights that we might need help with are the right to be safe, the right to privacy, the right to be treated with dignity and respect, the right to be involved in decisions about our lives, the right to live free from abuse and exploitation, we all have a part to play in protecting ourselves and others from harm.
So I think the film, especially the summary at the end, we all have the right to protect ourselves from harm. I think it gives a really clear message, doesn't it, about safeguarding and the rights that we all have and the rights that we're entitled to. And I thought it was useful to sort of start the session really with that film because it sets the scene, I think, really well for the rest of our session. So let's have a look then at some formal definitions around safeguarding. This first one here comes straight from the Care and Support Guidance, which is our statutory guidance, which sits right underneath the Care Act, which is our legislation for adult safeguarding. So safeguarding means protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. It's about people and organisations working together to prevent and stop both the risks and experience of abuse or neglect, while at the same time making sure that the adult's well-being is promoted, including where appropriate, having regard to their views, wishes, feelings and beliefs in deciding on any action. And I think this is a really critical part of adult safeguarding, that we always try to work with the adult to understand what their views and wishes are. Rather than simply making decisions about people, we make decisions with people through our safeguarding processes. This must recognise that adults sometimes have complex interpersonal relationships, may be ambivalent, unclear or unrealistic about their personal circumstances. So sometimes part of our role is to support the person around things like insight and about managing expectations as well. And I think that's really quite important. So just moving on to our next slide then. This one comes from Skills for Care. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Skills for Care. So Skills for Care is a really sector-specific organisation for social care, and they do a lot of work directly in line with government, promoting, again, safeguarding and social care in general. Their view is that safeguarding balances the right to be safe with the right to make informed choices, whilst at the same time making sure that the adult's well-being is promoted. So going back to that idea about well-being, and this bit's really important. This includes taking the person's views, wishes, feelings and beliefs into consideration in deciding on any action. Health and social care organisations have particular responsibilities, but every worker has a part to play. So when we're thinking about safeguarding being everyone's business, that last bit's really important, isn't it? Every worker has a role to play. So we'll carry on with that theme. Safeguarding is everyone's business. We hear it all the time. I just would like you to take a moment to think about what that phrase means to you in your role. And then I'm going to invite people to either verbally tell us their thoughts or to drop their thoughts into the chat. So safeguarding is everyone's business. What does that phrase mean to you? Take a moment to think about that. Isn't it nice having a moment of reflection on a Monday morning, everyone, for National Safeguarding Adults Week? So is anybody able and willing to tell us their thoughts? What does that phrase mean to you in your role in your life? Can anybody tell us? Is anybody feeling brave enough to take themselves off mute on a Monday morning? Emma.
It's Mandy. Hi.
Oh, Mandy, and then I'll come to Emma. Thank you. Go on, Mandy. Yep.
Yeah, for me, it's just making sure that everybody knows how to raise any concerns and who to talk to, and that everybody in the organisation is heard when they do have something to say. So speaking out, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not only the teams that you work with understanding their role, their responsibilities, but also that kind of embedding that culture that people will be listened to when they do need to do that. Thank you, Mandy. And Emma, over to you.
Yeah, similarly, to make sure everyone in the team knows, but not just presuming that it's somebody else's role. So I work directly with one-to-one with people, but even, admin staff or the people that come in to clean, or it's everybody's responsibility, because they might just pick up on something that I've not picked up on that day.
And I think you're right, Emma. It is those people in that more indirect role, potentially, that might see or hear something that they need to act on. So it's absolutely critical that we kind of do embed that message. So would anybody else like to add anything to what our colleagues Emma and Mandy have told us? Would anybody like to add anything? Well, it seems, Mandy and Emma, that you've done such a good job that there's no need for anyone else to fill in there. So thank you. Safeguarding adults is relevant and important in all sectors. And I think we can't really emphasise that message enough. It's not just the obvious sectors like health and social care and housing, is it? It's all sectors across our community. Safeguarding is the responsibility of all staff, volunteers and individuals within an organisation or the wider community. So those roles that are out and about in the community are really, really important. Again, Department of Health and Social Care talks about the role that we have, and they focus this time on spotting the signs of abuse and neglect. So workers across a wide range of organisations need to be vigilant about adult safeguarding concerns in all walks of life, including, amongst others. And I wonder now, if you think about your own role, I wonder now if you'll feature here. Health, social care, welfare, policing, banking, fire and rescue services, trading standards, leisure services, faith groups and housing, GPs in particular, are often well placed to notice changes in an adult that may indicate that they are being abused or neglected. And like I said, I wonder whether your specific role was outlined in that. Case studies in the Care Act guidance illustrate that someone who might not typically be thought of, in this case, the neighbour, does in fact have an important role to play in identifying when an adult is at risk. So when we think about safeguarding being everyone's business, we really are saying everyone's business, aren't we? We're not just saying that people who are in a paid role in these kind of industries or a volunteer in those industries, we're saying right the way across our community, people have a really important role to play in identifying when someone's at risk of harm. So safeguarding is everyone's business. According to the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, everyone needs to play their part in keeping children and adults at risk safe. To do safeguarding well, you must make sure people take on the right roles and responsibilities. Safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. This is from Charlotte Brooks from the Anne Craft Trust. Every organisation, small group and individual should be aware of their responsibility in work and society. So Anne Craft Trust are again emphasising that part about, out there in the community. Anne Craft Trust also talk about individuals and organisations being responsible for working together to protect an adult's right to live free from abuse and neglect. And I think the next bit's quite important, isn't it? Never assume safeguarding is someone else's responsibility. And it's thinking about how we can really kind of try to embed that message across the work that we do, that it's everyone's responsibility. And then last but not least, according to Somerset Safeguarding Adults Board, unpaid carers, so informal unpaid carers, have a range of roles regarding safeguarding. They can be the person who raises a concern themselves, they can be vulnerable to harm and abuse, or they can be the person who is harming an adult with care and support needs. So again, when we think about adult safeguarding, we need to think about the role of unpaid carers, those informal carers in an adult's life as well. Staff are the key people who can identify signs and indicators of abuse. Staff should act to prevent abuse and neglect from happening in the first place. So how do we embed a culture in our organisation around prevention, where rather than waiting for abuse to happen, we think about how we can prevent it happening in the first place? Okay, so what does the Care Act do? Because we're really focusing today, aren't we, on the bit of safeguarding that is that formal area of safeguarding, if you like, safeguarding with a capital S rather than safeguarding with a small s. So the Care Act and its statutory guidance and regulations explain how we must work with adults. So it talks about definitions. So who do we support through adult safeguarding? And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but the Care Act specifically talks about supporting adults with a care and support need through adult safeguarding. So it talks about the criteria for using our adult safeguarding process, if you like, is when we have a concern that an adult with care and support needs is experiencing or at risk of abuse or neglect. And because of those care and support needs, we feel the adult is unable to protect themselves from that experience or risk of abuse or neglect, focusing down on those care and support needs. So that's really what the Care Act talks about. There was a webinar back in 2020, and the person from Coventry City Council who was delivering that webinar talked about an adult with care and support needs in some way, shape or form needs to be looked after. And whilst I recognise that we don't tend to use that language, looked after, when we're working with adults, we usually refer to that when we're working with children. What we're saying is an adult with care and support needs is that person who has the extra level of need. Okay, and that's kind of how the Care Act and its guidance looks at that. The Care Act talks quite a lot about involving the adult in safeguarding, and I don't know whether you're familiar with our Making Safeguarding Personal agenda. Is this something you've come across before? So Making Safeguarding Personal really focuses on involving the adult in safeguarding, and it thinks about this kind of phrase here, nothing about me without me. In other words, wherever it's safe to do so, we need to be involving the adult in their safeguarding situation. We should be doing safeguarding with people, not two people. So Social Care Institute for Excellence talks about making safeguarding personal in terms of developing a safeguarding culture that focuses on the personalised outcomes desired by people with care and support needs who may have been abused. The adult concerned must always be at the centre of adult safeguarding inquiries. Their views and wishes should be sought at the earliest opportunity. And for those of you that have supported an adult to raise a safeguarding concern or raised one with a local authority on their behalf, you're probably familiar that if it's you raising the safeguarding concern on the adult's behalf, you will often be asked in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, is the adult consenting to you raising this concern? Are they aware that you are raising this safeguarding concern? Because our starting point should always be to try and involve the adult in their own safeguarding situation. So the Care Act and its guidance does talk about supporting the adult to raise a concern, talks about duty for local authorities to make inquiries or cause others to do so on their behalf. It really also puts an emphasis on the local authority and the duty to arrange for an independent advocate if the adult has substantial difficulty getting involved in those safeguarding discussions and conversations and they have no one appropriate to represent them. And sometimes the person that potentially may represent them in those discussions usually could be involved in that abusive situation. So is it a conflict of interest if that person at this time represents their views and wishes? And I think the duty to, commission and look at providing independent advocacy is really important, because what we're saying with that duty is we need to make sure the adult's voice is heard in safeguarding. There is a requirement to establish safeguarding adults boards under the Care Act and its guidance. They must have a strategy in place. They must publish annual reports about the activity that's taken place in their area, and they must carry out a safeguarding adult review. And I don't know whether any of you have been involved in safeguarding adult reviews, but a safeguarding adult review can take place when an adult with care and support needs in our area has either died or experienced serious harm due to abuse or neglect. The safeguarding partnership may have some concerns about agency working with that person around that time, and a safeguarding adult review really is focused on what can we learn from this situation? What can we take forward from that? How can we do things differently? And Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership have recently done a couple of learning events around safeguarding adult reviews, one focused on self-neglect and one focused on professional curiosity. And those recordings are available for you to access now. And I will make sure that they are linked from this presentation so you can access them afterwards. There is also under the Care Act duties around supplying information and cooperating generally. So if your organisation, for example, was asked to carry out a safeguarding inquiry, or they were asked to take part in a safeguarding adult review because your organisation had had some input with an adult who had care and support needs and died or experienced serious harm because of abuse or neglect, there would be an expectation that you would cooperate and supply information for those processes, or lead on it if it's a safeguarding adult review, if asked to do so by the local authority. What about our duty of care? So a duty of care is a legal and professional obligation to safeguard others while they're in your care, using your services, or are exposed to your activities. This means always acting in their best interests, not acting or failing to act in a way that causes harm, and acting within your abilities without taking on anything that lies outside of your competence. So there's quite an important message there, isn't there? If you are in a management role, for example, how do you support staff to recognise if something is outside of their competence when they might need to bring another agency in to support that situation? Safeguarding and a duty of care go hand in hand. You have a duty to safeguard individuals, promote their well-being, and ensure that people are kept safe from abuse, harm, or injury. You also have a duty to act if you believe others are not upholding that duty of care. So that means, for example, that we need to make sure that our whistleblowing policies are robust and supportive in our organisations, because that's really what we're talking about here. Sometimes we might have to speak up ourselves, or we might have to encourage colleagues to do exactly that if they have some concerns about wrongdoing in an organisation. So let's focus on and think about our role in safeguarding. Okay, and I'm just going to move on I'm not. I'm going to go back. And we're going to hear from Emma, who is a social worker in Wolverhampton.
Hello, I'm Emma Powell, social worker and service lead and safeguarding lead here at lovely Compton, which you can just see in the background. I absolutely believe that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, and one of my roles here is to ensure that all my colleagues are trained in how to spot the signs of abuse and neglect, how to hear disclosures when they happen, and how to use professional curiosity, and then what to do with that information once they've heard it or seen it, who to talk to, who to report it to, so that the patients and families that we work with here can live their lives free of harm, abuse and neglect. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So in terms of your role, would anybody like to add anything to what Emma's said? I think Emma had quite a broad brush stroke approach there, didn't she, when she was talking about the role of safeguarding and how she tries to embed that in her role. Would anybody like to say anything about their role and how they feel safeguarding fits under their umbrella, if you like?
I don't go out and work directly with residents, but within my role, we audit our safeguarding case file, so it's looking for examples of best practice within safeguarding team and making sure that those are shared and that everything's person-centred.
That's great, Rachel. So what you're really looking for there is you're looking for learning as well, aren't you? Learning within your organisation. And it sounds like you're auditing, you're kind of making safeguarding personal approach, Rachel. So are we making sure that we embed that in our practice? Are we making sure that we really embed our 6 safeguarding principles, proportionality, empowerment, accountability, all of those things, prevention, really important principles within our practice? So that's great, Rachel, to hear that you've got that kind of auditing process going on. And I think that is part of developing a really positive safeguarding culture, isn't it? Thinking about what we are doing and what we can do differently. How can we learn? So what about providers? What are our responsibilities? Safeguarding is everybody's business. Providers are required to meet essential fundamental standards of care. People using services are safeguarded additionally through monitoring by providers, commissioners, regulation and inspection. People's welfare should also be secured by good commissioning, contracts management, and for some people by care management or other forms of review. And I think, we just mentioned that word auditing. I think auditing is part of good practice, isn't it? What are we doing currently? What might we want to do differently? So, some of your organisations might have specialist safeguarding staff. You might have somebody who is a lead in that area, championing, safeguarding across the organisation, but it may be a general responsibility across everybody's role. So I think it's important to kind of make sure that it does go right across the organisation. What is my role? I think it is our role, isn't it, to have conversations with the adult about safeguarding. But don't forget this one here in the middle, prevention. What can we do in the first instance to try and prevent abuse and neglect happening? We've said wherever it's safe to do so, we need to be trying to involve the adult in decisions about raising a safeguarding concern outside of our organisation with our local authority. What have we done about risk? So if we recognise that there is a safeguarding situation, have we acted to address that risk before we've even thought about supporting the adult to raise it as a safeguarding concern? Have we worked with partners? Safeguarding adult reviews locally sometimes show that we don't always work in partnership with other agencies. Sometimes we might be fearful, for example, about sharing information. We might think that our legislation, GDPR and Data Protection Acts, we might think that they prevent us from sharing information. But the reality is they don't prevent us from sharing information, but they do get us to share information in the right, legal and proportionate manner. So I think it's an important distinction. Do we have policies in place? So do we have robust policies around safeguarding in place? And I mentioned earlier on, safeguarding with a capital S and safeguarding with a small s. And a lot of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis might be safeguarding with a small s. We're talking about safeguarding with a capital S, which is raising a safeguarding concern with our local authority, that very formal process. But when we think about policies, when we think about prevention, when we think about risk, often we'll be dealing with the safeguarding with a small s. the things that we can do on a day-to-day basis to try and make sure that safeguarding issues don't escalate into something more serious, to try and get in at an early stage, really, and work with the adult. So what is our role? What is the role of our teams? What is the role of volunteers? What is the role of members of the community? To spot the signs of abuse, perhaps to hear a disclosure of abuse from the adult, to know what to do, who to talk to, and who to report to. And a number of you have already mentioned those things. Consider how to involve the adult. How do we involve the adult at that early stage? To use professional curiosity. Okay, and on that note of professional curiosity, we're going to do a section now on professional curiosity. And I just really wanted to kind of embed that in our local practice. So as I've probably mentioned already, we've been doing a number of safeguarding adult reviews locally. And one of the themes coming out of them has been a lack of professional curiosity. Now, the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership have done a learning event on professional curiosity, which you are able to watch back. But I thought it'd be really important when we're thinking about safeguarding being everyone's business, that we think a little bit today about professional curiosity. So there is no universally accepted definition, in fact, of professional curiosity. It, generally speaking, is asking questions that give and solicit information without being intrusive or making the adult feel threatened. These should be open-ended and allow for additional probing. And I wondered, for the people on this session today, does anybody have a working definition of what professional curiosity is? Does anybody have a working definition that they can share with us on a Monday? What do you think professional curiosity is? Is anyone feeling brave enough to give us their working definition of what professional curiosity is? Any takers? Is that one step too far on a Monday morning? Working definitions. Shall I give you mine then? You're going to like it, I think. When I think about professional curiosity, I think about being respectfully nosy. But let's be honest about it. Some of us, both in work and outside of work, will be the person who's been called nosy by someone in their life. Do you recognize that about yourself, anybody? Because if you do, next time somebody calls you nosy, they might not even use respectfully nosy. If somebody calls you nosy next time, you can simply amend that and tell them that, in fact, you are being professionally curious. Doesn't that sound so much nicer? Okay, so being professionally curious really is a combination of looking, listening, asking direct questions, checking out and reflecting on information received. And for some of you, there will have been a point in your life, either in your work role, your volunteer role, or in your life outside of those roles, where you've had a gut feeling. You've had a gut feeling that something just didn't seem right. That's when professional curiosity is really important. It is about all of these things, testing out your hypothesis, not making assumptions. I think it's really important not to assume that everything's okay. I did some training recently and someone gave us a really good example of this, where somebody had been working with a family. They had some concerns and they took those concerns away and talked to someone about them. But that person said, oh, it's okay. I know that family. They're fine. There won't be any issues there. We can't make that assumption, can we? If we have a feeling that something's off or something indicates that, sometimes it is our role to follow that up. So triangulating information from different sources so that you can get a better understanding of an individual or perhaps family functioning, getting an understanding of an individual's and family's history, that might help you think about what can happen in the future. What about multiple sources of information? Don't just rely on one set of details. Try and get further details to give that some kind of context. Having an awareness of your own personal bias and how that might affect how you see those you're working with. And don't forget my working definition, being respectfully nosy. Okay. And I've just had a comment in the chat, which I think is really important as well, being non-judgmental. I think you're right to put that in. We do need to bear that in mind when we're exercising our professional curiosity. And the other thing is, don't set out to prove your theory. We need to really keep an open mind on what's happening here, don't we? Why do we need it? I think the concept of professional curiosity is something that we're probably quite familiar with, to be honest, working with safeguarding children. The concept has been around for a long time. But more recently, what we found in safeguarding adult reviews is that they have highlighted a similar need for us to exercise professional curiosity when safeguarding adults with care and support needs. So really, it goes across our entire safeguarding agenda, that need to exercise professional curiosity. Now, I'm going to show you a film, which I think really kind of encapsulates the notion of professional curiosity. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a film and then I'll ask for your thoughts after.
I'm here on Smithbury Street in Nottingham, where police are investigating the suspected murder of 52-year-old Mrs. Sarah Peters. They have arrested her husband John, and local residents are shocked, describing him to me as a pillar of the community. When I first got here, there were concerns about their daughter Julie and grandson Kyle, who live here too, having moved in 6 months ago after a divorce, although I've since heard they're safe. A neighbour told me she remembered Sarah as a chatty woman, although she hadn't seen her since she'd been diagnosed with early onset dementia, and that she was getting visits from carers. It's safe to say this is a neighbourhood in deep shock. And I'll hand you back to the studio.
Roughly 2/3 of domestic homicide victims are women, and the majority are killed by a partner or ex-partner, with the remainder killed by another relative or household member. This occurs across all cultures and ages. About half of intimate partner homicides include dependent children in the family structure. In approximately 3/4 of cases where victims or perpetrators presented to agencies with possible signs of domestic abuse and/or violence, this was not recognised or explored further. A lack of professional curiosity is often cited as a factor for this, as well as in other safeguarding reviews. Professional curiosity is the ability to explore and understand what is happening with a family, child, or adult. It is about not accepting a situation as it appears, especially if it does not feel right. It requires practitioners to act upon their safeguarding responsibilities, rather than make assumptions or take matters at face value. A curious professional will inquire by looking, listening, and proactively questioning and challenging all those involved. In the domestic homicide review for Sarah, a lack of professional curiosity was identified as a recurrent theme. John Peters had visited his GP twice in the 6 months prior to Sarah's murder to talk about difficulties in his relationship, but he wasn't asked on either occasion about the wider context. When carers visited Sarah, there was occasionally an uncomfortable atmosphere, and John tended to answer questions addressed to Sarah. One of the carers did once ask John to leave, and when he refused, she just accepted it, as showing him to be a supportive partner. Kyle's increasingly unusual behaviour at school, including sometimes seeming reluctant to go home, was noted by a couple of teachers. They asked how things were at home with Mum, but never questioned how things were with the grandparents and never raised it with the designated safeguarding lead. There are many potential barriers that prevent professional curiosity. Some of them include making assumptions or confirmation bias, which is the tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that fits your existing beliefs. In this case, teachers assumed Carl's behaviour was just about missing his dad, and that he was unhappy having to live with his grandparents and share a bedroom with his mum. The teachers did not recognise Carl's changing character over the 6 months he'd lived with his grandparents because it didn't fit with their presumptions. Both GPs that saw John also made assumptions that, as he was talking to them about problems in the relationship, he was likely to be the victim. Some of the carers, despite having a gut feeling that something wasn't right, including that John rarely let Sarah speak, just assumed it was because he was overprotective, nor was it ever recorded. But being brave and having difficult conversations is an important part in being professionally curious and providing effective safeguarding. Professional curiosity is about being respectfully nosy, being open-minded and not taking everything at face value, thinking the unthinkable, believing the unbelievable. We will never know if professionals had been curious, if they'd asked the next question, whether there would have been a different outcome for Sarah. For more
Okay, I don't know whether anyone has any thoughts on the film that we've just watched, but it seemed that there were a number of opportunities potentially to engage differently, perhaps, with that situation and ask those questions. And I think one of the things that really struck me about that short animation was perhaps the need to talk to others. You know, if something doesn't seem right, that need to talk to others and engage with others. Okay, so what about an absence of professional curiosity? What can that lead to? So in terms of an absence of professional curiosity, what about missed opportunities to identify less obvious indicators of vulnerability or harm? Assumptions made in assessments of needs and risk which are incorrect and lead to the wrong intervention for individuals or family members. So those factors might be relevant. And then I wondered, from your perspective, what do you think are the barriers to exercising professional curiosity? If we're thinking about a culture in an organisation, for example, and how we can support our teams to be professionally curious, to ask those questions, to come and have conversations with us, what are the barriers to that? So if you're feeling able to, you can definitely unmute and talk to us, or if not, you can drop your thoughts into the chat. And we have sorry, go on.
I think fear of being wrong, getting it wrong, and I think embarrassment and fear.
And that can be quite a significant barrier, actually, Emma, can't it? Especially if an individual's worked with that family or with that adult for quite some time, and they fear that if they have that conversation, if they ask those questions, actually they might have misinterpreted something. Yeah, thanks,
I'd
Emma.
only been with a client for the very first session that I had with her, and I got a gut feeling she was in her 90s. I don't know why. I followed it through, even though I was utterly petrified that it's the first safeguarding thing I'd ever raised, and I happened to be on the right path. So it is worth battling through that fear.
Yeah, and when we talk about, you just mentioned it then, when we talk about that gut instinct that something was off, the gut instinct is often, it's come from somewhere, hasn't it? It's something we've seen, something we've heard, something we've noticed, something we've observed. And that's where that gut instinct comes from. And you were right to follow it through. We've also got comments in the chat about unconscious bias, definitely. The victimization by the system if you get it wrong, potentially, widening out consultation and communication could be missing in some situations. So that they could be real barriers, couldn't they, to kind of exercising that professional curiosity. Yes, a heavy workload, making time to go the extra mile and explore. And I think that is a real challenge, isn't it? Because if we have got a really heavy workload and we're really challenged in terms of time, there is a temptation, isn't there, to just be very focused on what we think we are there to do at that moment in time and not think about the wider implications of that. Because sometimes, let's be honest, we might think, well, someone else might see the same thing that I've seen. Someone else might have the same gut instinct that I've got. They might follow it up. But that assumption often isn't right. Angela, there could be language barriers. Yeah, definitely right. There could be some language barriers. We might need some support around that. Yeah.
I think like Emma said, it's people are afraid of getting it wrong, but then it's but what if I'm right and I didn't do anything?
Yeah.
It's that I've been in that situation before where I'd always prefer to be wrong and have raised it than to actually be right and not have done anything. It's that, well, could I live with myself if I didn't?
Yeah.
If I didn't raise any concerns and the worst case scenario happens.
Yeah. And I think it is about using our relationships, using our rapport with people, isn't it? And if we do get it wrong, then we are able to explain to that person our concerns and why we acted in that way, why we had those conversations with them. And, you know, having conversations about safeguarding, I think they might come under that umbrella of difficult conversations. You know, we might be a bit fearful, we might approach it with a bit of trepidation, not the easiest conversation to have. And we might have to use our language carefully. We might use some reflection. This is what I've noticed. This is what I've seen. I'm concerned. Would you be concerned if you saw this happening to someone else? You know, all of those kind of conversations. I think they sometimes do come under that umbrella of being difficult conversations, but they are just conversations, aren't they? They're conversations that we sometimes need to have. So I think you're right. I think you've identified a number of barriers to exercising professional curiosity. And you said time, you know, fear of conflict and avoiding those difficult conversations. Do we always feel confident to deal with a response depending on what we find out? You know, we might have that issue going on. Do we know how to respond? What services are there to help people and support people? Do we have the right knowledge of safeguarding and services that are available locally? Sometimes it could be that the person thinks it isn't their role and that someone else will deal with it. And what about that last one there? We might not always think about that one. What about if you work in the same community where you live, or what about your teams working in the same community where they live? Are they going to be potentially picking up on issues that impact them outside of work as well? So there, you know, there's quite a lot of potential barriers. How do we overcome them? Well, I think it's about talking about them, isn't it? It's talking about them. How do we feel about it? Recognizing that we might lack confidence, or our teams might, asking for help. So this could be talking to our supervisors. If we are the supervisor, it could be talking to our teams, getting opportunities to develop practice and understanding. How about we do a little bit of role play around having those difficult conversations? It's everyone's favorite thing to do, isn't it? Role play those conversations out. But the thing is, that's sometimes what builds our understanding. Can we practice using our open questions? And when I think about open questions, I think about our TED questions. TED. Tell me, explain, describe. They're really great open questions to use, and we call them our TED questions. I don't know if you've heard them before. Tell me, explain, describe. They're really great questions to get information. So what are people's roles, and what is the legal grounds or basis of the contact that we have with the adult? If you are a safeguarding lead, does that mean that you always know the answers? The reality is not. So if you are the safeguarding lead, it is about being open and transparent, isn't it? And saying, at this moment in time, I'm going to need to think about that a little bit more. I'm going to have to go away and find out some more information. I think it's okay to do that, actually. And I am a safeguarding lead in my job role. And I think sometimes we do need to be upfront, don't we? If we don't know immediately the answer to that, we need to know where we can find it out. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about professional curiosity, I will put the link in after today to your after course resources to the webinar that Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership did around professional curiosity. You might find that useful. And there are a couple of documents that you might want to refer to as well. So in Shropshire, there's a Shropshire Professional Curiosity Management and Practice Guidance, and that applies to working with adults and children. And in Telford and Wrekin, we've got the best practice guidance on professional curiosity, which is quite focused on working with children, but the principles of professional curiosity go across our work with not only children, but also with adults with care and support needs as well. Okay, so how can you make safeguarding your business? I guess that's my question. Be a champion in your organisation. Show leadership. Provide access to training. Or if you are a person that requires training, access that training. Think about prevention. Think about responding to concerns, knowing how to report. Do your teams have that same information? Taking proportionate action. If someone in a position of trust, for example, harms an adult, we have extra responsibilities, don't we, to flag that up, to make sure that other people are safe. Be robust in your recruitment practice. For those of you working in social care, are you aware of the Better Hiring Institute toolkit for social care, which is a recruitment toolkit, which really is being held up as the gold standard? And it's spent a lot of time thinking about the role of references in recruitment practice and how we give and receive references. Just because you don't work in social care, it doesn't mean that toolkit's not going to be useful for you. It's a really good, robust toolkit. I highly recommend it to anybody working with adults with care and support needs. Learn lessons and make changes that could prevent similar abuse or neglect happening to other people. So it's going back to what one of you said earlier, isn't it? About what do we do in our organisation to make sure that we learn the lessons and that actually we ourselves can learn lessons to make changes. And that's really the key bit, isn't it? How can we make changes? To involve adults in safeguarding and to work in partnership. So really, for me, they are some of our absolutely key messages around our role in safeguarding and making safeguarding everyone's business, because it really is everyone's business. If we do need to raise safeguarding concerns, I'm sure that you're very familiar with this already. But I think it's not just about picking up a phone and raising a safeguarding concern with our local authority. It's about how we involve the adult with care and support needs. It's about the conversation that we have the adult around our concerns, why we're worried about that situation. What do they think about the situation? What are their worries? What are their concerns? What outcomes would they want from adult safeguarding? They're the important things. Would they want to be the one themselves that raises a safeguarding concern with our local authorities in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin? If not, would they like your help to do that? Or would they want you to be the one to pick up the phone and raise a safeguarding adult's concern with the local authority? In those cases, we are involving the adult. We might also feel in some cases that it could be in the public interest to raise a safeguarding adult's concern, even though the adult is saying that they don't want that to happen. So you're probably familiar with public interest, but it could be things around serious crime has taken place, other adults or children are at risk of harm. The adult isn't making a decision freely about raising that safeguarding concern because they are experiencing coercion or control. Perhaps the person that's harming the adult is also an adult who has needs for care and support. They may also require support through safeguarding. You are so concerned about the level of risk posed to the adult that you believe it would be in the public interest to raise that concern with the local authority. And we need to also bear in mind capacity. We need to use our mental capacity legislation. So if you believe the adult lacks specific capacity to make the decision about raising a safeguarding concern with our local authority because they are experiencing abuse or neglect, then you would need to use the Mental Capacity Act. You would need to make a best interest decision about raising that concern, consulting other relevant people to make your best interest decision. So if you do feel a safeguarding concern is needed locally, you would contact in Shropshire, first point of contact. In Telford and Wrekin, you would be contacting Family Connect and you would be supporting the adult to do the same. If it's an out-of-hours social work emergency, we have teams that are set up to deal with that. And don't forget, sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you need to contact one of our emergency services if it's urgent action that's required. So that was my input around safeguarding as everyone's business. Thank you.
Thank you.